The emphasis here is not on punishment. The aim is to rehabilitate its young residents within the confines of a secure setting and to prepare them for release.
Yes, you get the media stories, don't you, about, you know, their holiday camps, they have playstations. But the law in this country says that the deprivation of your liberty is the punishment, not something extra we do once you're inside, but actually being deprived of your liberty is the punishment. And I think, you know, an expectation that then people are going to be in chains and live on bread and water is perhaps wrong.
It costs about £215,000 a year to keep a child in a home like this. But there are no statistics on reoffending rates from secure units, so it's impossible to tell if they're successful or not. And for the families of victims, the regime can often appear too lenient.
As the years were going on, I was learning about how they were getting treated in there. They were getting given the best of everything. They picked wallpaper to go on the walls, and every game that come out on the market, they were getting given. So I thought, you know, where's the punishment in this? I just felt so let down by it all.
As Jon Venables approached his 18th birthday, he became embroiled in a scandal. He was accused of having sex with a female care worker from Redbank. Though there were no criminal charges, the carer was suspended and never returned to the unit. And in an official report in 2000, inspectors criticised the running of the home, saying in some areas it fell short of the standards required to meet the needs of young people within it, and demanded urgent improvements. It's not clear if these failings had any direct impact on Venables' care and progress in the unit, and within months, the authorities decided that both he and Robert Thompson were ready to be released.
Good evening. The killers of James Bulger are to be freed. 8 years after they were jailed, the Home Secretary announced that Jon Venables and Robert Thompson will be released on what's known as a life licence. They'll be under supervision for the rest of their lives and could be rearrested at any time if they're thought to be a risk to the public.
An official report drawn up by health professionals directly involved in their care said both had made exceptional progress. They'd never been violent, had worked hard at their studies, and had considerable achievements to their credit. The risk of them reoffending, the experts said, was low. Albert Kirkby disagreed.
Jon Venables had no experience of life as a teenager and as a young adult outside. I think when you look at what we've learnt, it raises big questions as to whether it was a matter that Jon Venables will be released or whether he should actually be retained in custody, but perhaps in some other location. And I think that's a key part that we've learnt looking at the whole aspects of secure units. So I seriously question the assessments that were made that he was ready to make that transition at 18 years of age.
This the first sign of outrage in Liverpool, a convoy of lorries passing James Bulger's grave. At the lead, his mother Denise. In a statement, she said the killers were evil and shouldn't have been released.
I just felt so let down. I thought, you know, why are they getting released after what they've done? You know, that they should be spending more time. They should go on to an adult prison, not getting released. It's too early to release them. I thought, no, this is not right. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to bide my time because one day one of them are going to end up, or both of them are going to end up back in an adult prison because they are going to reoffend.
Just 8 years after he murdered James Bulger, Jon Venables was released on a life licence, which imposed strict conditions on what he could and couldn't do on the outside. He had to be of good conduct. He was forbidden from contacting the family of James Bulger and from going back to Merseyside without permission. Any infringement would immediately lead to him being locked up again. Albert Kirkby wasn't optimistic.
I'd hoped that they were capable of being rehabilitated, but I never had the faith in the system where I believe that they could have achieved that by the time they were 18 years of age. And I shared the belief that they should have gone into prison as a warning to them that if ever they did break the conditions of their parole, that was where they were going to end up.
As Venables prepared for freedom, there were real concerns that he might be targeted in a revenge attack for James Bulger's murder. So he was given a secret new identity, which the media were expressly forbidden to reveal.
He had his own sort of network of probation officers, and he had to have this whole identity created for him with false documents, with a passport, GCSE certificates, a national insurance number, everything that created a background for him. And even to the extent of what was called a legacy lie, a story that he could tell people to make him convincing as in this false identity. And the pressure of that, I think, must be huge.
It must be really difficult to actually have a new identity. As an 18, 19-year-old, striking out on your own for the first time, also having that big secret hanging over you, I would imagine makes it more stressful.
To begin with, it all looked so promising and so rosy. He had a flat, he was able to find a job, he enrolled in college, he even had a girlfriend. All the reports are very positive. He's being monitored constantly, has a huge support from the probation service.
The court injunction protecting Jon Venables' identity severely restricts what can be reported about him since his release. But we have spoken in detail to one of his friends, who first met him in 2002, shortly after his release. We've used the voice of an actor to protect his identity.
Well, he was shy at first, obviously. I got on with him, like, basically straight away. Had similar interests, music, sport and that. Just hit it off from there, really. He was a nice lad, do you know what I mean? He was great to get on with, a good laugh, basically. I mean, no one spoke about a word of him.
For 5 years, Venables had weekly meetings with his probation officer and steered clear of any trouble.
He's being monitored on such a regular basis, because it's going so well, they start to downgrade the supervision, and I think that he lost a lot of the support that he'd had.
By January 2006, his life seemed stable. He had a full-time job, he stopped seeing his psychiatrist, and his meetings with his probation officer were reduced to once every 3 weeks. Everything was going smoothly, but it was about to go downhill. He was rejected from a management training scheme and forced to end a relationship because his girlfriend had a child. In 2008, at the age of 26, he was again in trouble with the police.
He's arrested for a scuffle outside a nightclub, and in fact the charges are dropped, and then shortly after that he's arrested for possession of a small amount of cocaine. Later admits that he's been using cocaine quite regularly and also taking this drug this drug methadone.
His friends also witnessed his developing drug habit.
He started off with tablets, if I remember rightly, and then he'd be into poppers as well. And then weeks, months down the line, he was into cocaine and all that stuff. It was like an addiction in the end. Got it out, lined it up, taking it before, and then after work, he'd go home, do another one before he went out on a night out. And I was like, why are you doing that? And he goes, basically, mate, it blocks out things sometimes I just don't want to think about.
Despite his monitoring, Venables was given permission to go abroad and chose to holiday with friends in Amsterdam.
I remember he went to Holland with some mates. It was more of the same as over here. Nightclub, drink, drugs, looking at girls. Over there it's a different country, different culture. I guess he just wanted to experience a different atmosphere with his mates. It's an experience you can remember all your life. I think he liked it.
All through that period that he was out, there was this constant fear of being discovered. He was afraid. He was afraid of being found out. He was afraid of, being the victim of some revenge attack.
After his arrest for fighting and the evidence of drug abuse, his supervision was stepped up again. He was told to meet his probation officer every week. He was also placed on a curfew and had to stay at home from 11 o'clock at night until 6:30 in the morning. But for Albert, this intervention came too late.
We know there was close supervision with him, which would perhaps help him in some way of feeling secure, because there was always someone there who he could turn to. Someone who could tell him, like his life inside, how to run his life. And instead of that supervision and contact slipping away and being eased off, that is the period when we know now that Jon Venables became vulnerable. His behaviour went out of control, and there wasn't the mechanism there, the system there, that he felt that he could go to and feel happy with. That cannot be acceptable.
Venables' spiral of decline continued. Though it was strictly forbidden under the terms of his licence, he started going back into Merseyside, close to the scene of James Bulger's murder.
He goes back to watch Everton matches and he goes to see concerts. If he'd been found out to be doing those things, he would have been recalled to prison immediately, and arguably he should have been recalled to prison.
But he wasn't. And after one late night drinking session with his friends, Venables finally cracked. Despite all the efforts to protect him from exposure, he started to reveal his true identity.
We went out, he was like himself, normal, talking about the obvious, football, music, and roughly about 11:30, 1 o'clock in the morning when he was more gone, he was like, "Got something to tell you." He said, "Do you remember that little kid in Liverpool that got killed in the train tracks?" So I was just like, "Yeah, why? What about it?" He said, "I've got something to confess, that was me." I said, "Behave yourself." And he just goes, "Yeah, all right." But for some reason that stuck in my mind. But 4 weeks later, having a drink, doing the same thing as normal, got to like 2, 3 in the morning, he said it to me again. So I just laughed it off again. Must have been some kind of release valve where he just had enough and he couldn't carry on, basically. 2 weeks later, I heard from other people say he put him for references because he wanted to leave the job and work somewhere else. I went round his anyway and it was like completely empty. I was just like, where the hell's he gone? Like he just uplifted and disappeared somewhere.
He reports to his probation officer that his identity, he believes, has been disclosed. They call the police come around and find him hacking at a computer to get the hard drive out or to destroy the hard drive. They take the computer and they find on it all these quite grotesque images of child pornography.
Venables was found to have 102 indecent images of children on his computer, some depicting the rape of children as young as 2 years old. He was immediately recalled to prison and later convicted on pornography charges. He was jailed for 2 years.
Jon Venables, one of the two killers of the toddler James Bulger, has been sentenced to 2 years in prison for downloading child pornography. James Bulger's mother, Denise, said the sentence was too short and that justice still hadn't been done.
Did it come as a shock to you when you were eventually told that Venables had been rearrested and was then back in custody?
Well, they've always believed that they'd go on to re-offend, and that's been proven with Venables. So I was just praying that he didn't hurt anyone else. That's all that was going through my mind. I just hope no one else has suffered at his hands.
So what did go wrong? Did the attempt to rehabilitate him simply not work? And was he really prepared for life outside? Venables himself blamed the pressure of living under the constant fear of reprisals and with a false identity for his reoffending.
Jon Venables had been taught to lie and become very good at it, so when he had things that perhaps he shouldn't have been doing that he wanted to conceal, then he was able to do that.
How on earth can someone who's murdered and is then introduced to a false identity actually handle that? I think it's very, very difficult to actually expect somebody to live a lie on the back of what they've done.
In January 2010, the two Edlington brothers were sentenced to serve at least 5 years for what the judge called a sadistic crime against 2 other children. They're now going through the same system of rehabilitation as the one that some believed failed Jon Venables. But with one major difference. As they have never been publicly named, they won't need new identities when they are eventually released.
I am pleased that they haven't been named, because I think that is one less added difficulty for their reintegration into life as adults.
But I hope that the two boys that inflict the injuries on them, I hope they don't get treated the way Thompson and Venables got treated. I think we should learn from the past, you know, that it doesn't work giving them the best of everything. It doesn't work rehabilitating them. It doesn't work spending a lot of money on them.
In many parts of the United States, the authorities shared Denise Fergus's scepticism about the value of rehabilitation. Here, the focus is on long-term punishment. In August 1993, just 6 months after the murder of James Bulger, a similar case shook America. 13-year-old Eric Smith was accused of killing and abusing 4-year-old Derek Roby.
All rise. County Court is now in session. The Honorable Donald G. Purple Jr. presiding. He's about that tall. He weighed 40 pounds. He lived 4 years and 10 months. And that person killed him. Eric Smith choked and battered the young life out of Derek Roby.
That day, Derek had left his house to play at a sports field 200 yards away. He was never seen alive again.
So you find the defendant guilty of murder in the second degree?
Yes.
Is that unanimous?
Yes.
You may be seated. Take the young man in custody.
The 13-year-old was jailed for a minimum of 9 years, but a maximum of life. Eric Smith spent 8 years in juvenile detention. But then, instead of being freed, he was transferred to a high-security adult prison, and he's still there today, 18 years after committing the crime. Derek Roby's family insist he shouldn't be freed.
I know I killed Derek, and you know, like I said before, I'm sorry for it. I am. And there's not a day that goes by in some way, shape, or form that I'm like forced to remember what I did. Regardless of what labels they give me, doesn't mean that that's what I am. You can label me a monster, a cold-blooded killer, a demon child, Satan incarnate. I don't care what the name you give me. Doesn't mean that that's who I am.
Since 2002, Eric Smith has appealed 4 times to the parole board to be released. Each time, it was rejected. There is no guarantee he will ever be released. Jon Venables could be back on the streets as early as July 2011, though it will be up to the parole board to decide if he's ready. He will remain on a life licence, and his name will be added to the sex offenders register. While there's no suggestion that Robert Thompson has reoffended, Venables' release is likely to reignite the passionate debate on how Britain should deal with children who commit violent crimes.
What do we want to do with these children who do commit very serious offences? Now, some people would say, well, you should lock them up and throw away the key. But if we believe that adults can be rehabilitated, surely we have to believe it for children. Surely we have to believe that children who do something awful at a very young age, at the beginning of their development, with the right treatment, can be helped to develop in a way that will make sure they never do anything like that again.
Albert feels a unique set of factors led to Venables reoffending. Some created by the system itself.
You can never have a system that's 100% perfect. But what we can learn from Jon Venables is the areas where they become vulnerable in early adulthood where they've failed to come to terms with what they've done, make the adjustments to living outside, and also living under a false identity, a lie, should be seriously considered when they're looking towards the future of other young people who are placed in a similar position.